I remember house before it was called house. I remember house when house respected house. I remember house when house grew from the roots of house. I remember house when house was soul music and R&B before house was disco. Before house was disco. I remember house before the super clubs. I remember house when people knew the lyrics of house. I remember house before record labels sold the house. I remember house when house was about love. House was about love. House was about love. House was about love. I remember house. Just a name to package this sound, this groove, this emotion. I remember house when it was just one house. I remember house when house had artists, songwriters, and personalities. I remember house when you didn't have to be a DJ just to be into house. I remember house when house was broke. I remember house when house was done in the house. I remember house when it was a spiritual thing. It was a spiritual thing. I remember house.
Do you remember house? Do you remember house? Do you remember house? Do you remember house? House, 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 house. Do you remember house? House, 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 house. Do you remember house? House, 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 house. Do you remember house? House, 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 house.
I remember house before it was techno. I remember house before it had an afro. I remember house before it was deep. I remember house before it was hard. I remember house when house had tempos. I remember house before MPC 60s. I remember house before house had loops. I remember house before the whole world knew. I remember house.
Do you remember house? Do you remember house? Do you remember house? Do you remember house?
Keep that funk alive. Keep that funk alive. Getting high on another high. Keeping that funk alive. Keep that funk alive. Keep that funk alive. You gotta keep that funk alive.
Say yeah, party shakers. Yeah. Are you ready to shape up and get live?
We live.
Well, come over here, all you party shakers.
Yeah.
It's time to line up side by side, Papa. Say yeah.
Let's wind it up and roll on time. Nice and thick and chocolate, put it in my mouth. So light and right from the appetizer. Don't let it all run out. Let's wind it up.
You're so nice and thick and chocolate, girl. Move me inside out. Red, yellow, green, it all tastes good. Well, how's about a little mouth to mouth, baby?